everybody, today we're kicking off our populations and communities unit, and we're going to start with symbiotic relationships. Sym means together and bio means life. So these are relationships where two organisms are going to live and work together, and there's different types of symbiotic relationships that we're going to investigate. This is our biological hierarchy from the very smallest components of living things all the way up to the entire planet and all of the living things it contains. So you may notice that we have moved through our biology course, building from atoms and molecules all the way up to the biosphere, but we are currently in populations and communities. So these are where we're going to be focusing today. Sometimes on the EOC, you might see questions that ask you to put this hierarchy in order. So it's good to practice this and know these different components and how life is structured. Different disciplines of biology focus on different areas of the hierarchy. When we study ecology, these are the four areas that we focus on. Populations are groups of the same species living in an area. So think about the US Census. It's an attempt to count all the people living in the United States. We could have different populations for different organisms. We could look at the number of spruce trees in the forest or the number of earthworms living under a rock. So populations, same species in a certain area. Communities are groups of different species living in an area. So think about the community where you live. We live in Trap Hill, Hayes, McGrady, North Carolina. And it's not just people that live in your community. There's dogs and cats and horses and cows, trees, grass, mushrooms, bacteria. There's all kinds of living things in that community besides just people. So these are all the different species. Ecosystems are groups of living and non-living things in an environment. And keep in mind that the amount of precipitation an area gets combined with the temperature in that area is going to give you certain conditions for certain plants to grow. And those plants will set what kind of animals can live in that area. So ecosystems comprise not just the animals and plants, fungi, bacteria, whatever in an area, it's also the non-living things that make it up, the sunlight, the pH, the salt, all those kinds of things. The biosphere is all the living things on the planet. So if we wanted a picture of the biosphere, you would have to be looking at all of planet Earth. If we look at these pictures here, you have a group of tadpoles living in a little pond. So which one of these words would this picture represent? Hopefully you are thinking population because these are all tadpoles living in an area. Here you've got giraffes and zebra and elephants, these trees all living in this area. So which word would this picture represent? Hopefully you are thinking community because these are all the different species in this area. And here we have a picture with sunlight and heat labeled. You've got bacteria, plankton, a rotting log, some termite mounds. So think about which word this picture is representing. And hopefully you're thinking ecosystem because you do have the non-living or abiotic factors and the biotic factors included. We get stable ecosystems when the populations of the species living in that ecosystem cycle in a predictable manner. So you can think about a population increasing when there is a lot of food to support that population. As that population grows, that food is going to get diminished. And once you're out of food, that population is going to crash. There's just not enough to support all those individuals. And so we get this increase and decrease in population numbers according to how much food there is available. Habitats are places where an organism lives. Think about like a bird's nest might be its habitat. This is going to depend on water, food, shelter, where this organism is going to call home. A niche is an organism's role in its environment. Think about it like its job. And this includes what that organism would eat, where it's going to be getting its food from, what kind of waste it releases. Because remember, some organisms will use waste from other organisms to enable their own life processes. And this could also include filtering pollution from the environment. That could be a job or a role that an organism would have. So practice with the difference in those two words. The competitive exclusion principle basically states that two individuals can't live in the exact same area and have the exact same role without competing for resources. So here we've got 5 different birds living in the same tree. And notice that different parts of the tree are shaded for different birds. This is representing where they would get their food in these different trees. So notice that none of the birds have the exact same locations that they're going to feed from. However, there is some overlap. For example, this little Cape May warbler and this Blackburnian warbler are going to be eating off of the same area of the tree from time to time. And when they're both there, they're going to be competing for those seeds or insects. And competition can be not just head-to-head combat and fighting for resources, but just racing to get to those resources faster. Symbiotic relationships are those in which two species are going to attempt to live together. There's different types of symbiosis. These are the 5 I want you to know, though there are others. And I've given you a chart here to help make sense of 3 of those relationships. The X's represent different species. And notice that each row has 2 different X's in it. So there's 2 species involved with each relationship. And where they are in this chart, as in which column they're in, will tell you how that relationship works between those 2 species. For example, here we have mutualism, and both X's are in the benefits column. So both species benefit from this relationship, like a flower and a bee. The flower gets pollinated by the bee, so it can pass its traits on to more offspring. The bee gets nectar or food from the flower, and so both of those benefit from this relationship. A commensalistic relationship occurs when one species benefits and the other species is unaffected. Think about a hermit crab. It's going to take shells from other mollusks that have already died. So the hermit crab benefits from that relationship. It gets a free shell it doesn't have to make. But the hermit crab did not affect the mollusk. It was already dead before the hermit crab came into the picture. So the mollusk was unaffected by the hermit crab. Parasitism occurs when one species benefits and the other species is harmed. Think about a tick on a dog. The tick is going to suck nutrients out of the dog's blood. So the tick is going to benefit because it's going to get food, but the dog is going to be harmed. Not only is it losing nutrition because it's getting its blood sucked out, but it's also has a higher chance of getting a disease passed to it from the tick. Predation is another form of symbiosis where one species hunts and kills another for energy, like a lion and a zebra. The lion's going to take down the zebra, eat it for energy. You've seen National Geographic, you're probably already familiar with predation. Competition occurs when 2 species fight or race one another to get to resources. If we look closer at predation, remember one organism is going to hunt and kill another. The predator is the hunter and the prey is the hunted. I call my cat a little predator because he's such a great hunter. Predation is a key role in stable ecosystems. Remember, stable ecosystems have populations that can be predicted from one year to the other based on food availability. Populations that get too high are prone to starvation and disease. So here we have a graph, and we'll talk about this more later. This is a really well-documented study occurring in Isle Royale. This is a national park off the coast of Michigan in Lake Superior. And Isle Royale has a moose population. And in the 50s, all the wolves on Isle Royale disappeared. They died. So the moose had no predators, and they kept eating the vegetation, and the population just kept growing and growing and growing until all that vegetation was basically gone. And the moose population just plummeted because they all started to starve to death. So scientists brought in a pack of wolves in the 1950s to regulate this moose population. So notice what happens here. We have the moose in the green and the wolves in the orange. The wolves are mapped on this axis and the moose are mapped over here. So notice there's always more moose than there are wolves. And that would make sense because this moose is the wolf's food source. As the moose population continues to grow, then we are providing more food for the wolf population. So that's more food to feed these wolves, and so you can support a higher population. So notice that the wolf population increases shortly after the moose. Keep in mind, it takes time for these wolves to reproduce, so there's going to be a delay in the increase in the wolves from the increase in the moose. Once the wolf population gets really high, there's more wolves hunting these moose, and so the moose tend to go back down. Now, At this point, there's not enough moose to support this high wolf population, and so the wolf population will crash. And we get this cycle increase in the prey with an increase in the predator shortly after. Decrease in the prey, and then a decrease in the predator shortly after. Disease also spreads rampantly when populations are high. I think we're seeing a lot of that now, but we'll talk more about that kind of thing later. Competition occurs when two or more species are trying to use the same resources, and there's two kinds of competition, intra-specific and inter-specific. Intra-specific occurs within a species. Okay, intra means inside. So this would be when two of the same species are fighting for a resource. Interspecific competition is going to occur between two different species. Inter means between. So that would be this vine growing up this tree. They're not the same species, but they're both competing for light. So intra and interspecific competition both happen. There are many things that organisms of different species would need to compete for: food, water, shelter. There's only one thing that organisms of different species might not compete for, and that would be mating rights. A deer will fight with another deer over a doe. A deer is not going to fight with a cow over a female cow. It's not going to happen. So intraspecific competition will involve mating, where interspecific competition will not. These are some really cool symbiotic videos I want you to watch. Please take the time to watch these. They're really cool, and they show you relationships between two different species. So this one's my favorite. This is adorable. It's a goby, which is a little fish, and a shrimp, and how they live together in the same burrow. This one's a really cool one, wasps and caterpillars. Some people might not want to watch this one before you eat anything. And then the cordyceps fungus, this is the zombie fungus in insects. So please check these out. They're really cool. See if you can figure out what kind of symbiosis you're seeing. Organisms have to be able to communicate, especially with their own species, but also other species as well. Communication helps organisms to identify themselves in the group, helps them to attract mates, warn of predators, and fight for territory and mark their territory. You see here, this coyote is marking his territory. You might have dogs that do the same thing. If you ever go to a prairie dog town and you get to see all the little prairie dogs scattered across the plains in their little burrows, there's a bunch of them that live there. And you'll always find most of the prairie dogs are out sniffing around for food and doing their thing. But there's always going to be one or two prairie dogs sitting at the tunnel, sitting up, looking around, watching for predators. And when they see a predator, they're going to bark to the other prairie dogs to warn them, and they can all go into their holes and stay safe. When it comes to attracting mates, a lot of times species will use calls, like birds use bird calls to call in mates, or pheromones. You may be familiar with hunting deer, spraying deer urine to pull in the deer. And that is a chemical attractant that's going to make the organisms come closer to that smell. Organisms communicate in different ways. Sound is probably the top way we would think about communication because we talk to each other. It's really common in mammals and birds to use sound communication as well. Bats use echolocation to communicate with themselves about what the environment looks like. Visual is sight, and so plenty of organisms communicate by sight. Birds will do really cool courtship dances. If you get a chance to look at any courtship videos, they're really neat. This is an example of the waggle dance in bees, and you can look up videos for this as well. Bees can do a little geometry. In the morning, the bees are going to send out a few scouts to look around the area for food patches. And when they find a food patch, the scout's going to come back to the hive, and it's going to communicate where that food is according to where the sun is in the sky at the time. So if we have the sun here and we're thinking about a vertical hive, then these bees are going to do what's called a waggle dance and point to the direction of the food. So this bee is going to just walk this arc here, and then it's going to wiggle its little butt and go this way and point toward where that flower patch is. Then it's going to come back, just walk this way, and then again, it's going to waggle its little butt to go this way. The length of this line will indicate the distance to the flower patch, and the angle between this line and the sun will indicate the direction that the bees need to go to find their flower patch, which is really cool. We already mentioned chemical communication, pheromones, that deer might use, other mammals are going to use as well to communicate, especially to mark territory and signal for mating. If you want to do a cool little trick with pheromones, you can capture ants. I'm sure we've all seen ants leave a trail and all the ants seem to follow in that one little line. If you have a big blue pen, then you can capture an ant and draw a circle around it on a piece of paper. And the chemical in the big blue ink from your pen will actually smell to an ant like the ant pheromone trail, and they'll follow your line that you drew. Other pens don't do this. So if you want to play with pheromones, you can, again, capture an ant and play with a big blue pen, try some other colors. Termites do the same thing. So that's everything I've got on symbiosis. I hope you enjoyed. Please watch the videos, look up some other examples on your own, complete your practice problems, and try your quiz on SchoolNet. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye, guys.